बोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्।
ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय आविराविर्मयेति रुद्रयत्ते दक्षिणं मुखं तेन मां पाहि नित्यम्. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we shall resume today with verse number 14 in chapter 12. As we saw last week, this is a very helpful and also useful section of the chapter where Krishna describes very clearly the kind of qualities that are helpful not only to be a bhakta, a good devotee, but also to be a good spiritual seeker. So although these qualities appear in this chapter called Bhakti Yoga, we should remember that all of these qualities are essential not only for those who are in the path of devotion, but in spiritual path itself, irrespective of whichever yoga is the dominant part of one's spiritual practice. So I will read verse number 13 again, just to go over quickly over what we saw last time, and then we will start with verse number 14. So verse number 13 first. Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitrav karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukhakshami. He who hates no creatures and is friendly and compassionate towards all, who is free from the feelings of I and mine, even-minded in pain and pleasure, forbearing. This is what comes in verse number 13. So whoever has these qualities, Krishna says, is dear to me. In other words, these are the kind of qualities that make us fit for spiritual life. So let us look at verse number 14 now. Santushtas satatam yogi yatatma dridhanishchayah mayyar pitamano buddhihi yomad bhaktas same priyaha. Ever content, steady in meditation, self-controlled, and possessed of firm conviction, with mind and intellect fixed on me, he who is thus devoted to me is dear to me. Let us take up these qualities one by one. Santushtaha. We briefly discussed this last Sunday. Santushtaha, santoshaha means to be contented. And in that context, I had quoted a very important quotation from Swami Vivekananda, who once said that by being cheerful always and smiling, it takes us nearer to God, nearer than any prayer. So being cheerful always is a spiritual practice. And as we saw last time, there will be occasions in life when it may not be easy to smile. It may not be easy to be cheerful. Even in such apparently adverse circumstances, if I can will myself in being cheerful and contented, then that would be a spiritual practice. Now we might ask, if things are really bad around us, how can we be cheerful? Now clearly, santosha, santushta, being cheerful is different from just gloating. It's not like we laugh at anyone's suffering, others or one's own. But being in a cheerful state, being in a contented state, gives us a better chance to find the right way to deal even with adverse circumstances. And so, even if there is no special reason to smile, we must still be contented. And think about it this way. For a spiritual seeker, as long as the circumstances around me are such that I'm still able to keep my eyes focused on the spiritual ideal, that I still have this longing to attain that ideal, and I'm making my effort. They may not be perfect, they may not be sufficient, but I'm still able to do it. These are, I think, reasons enough to be cheerful, in spite of many other things going wrong in our lives. But for a spiritual seeker, if reaching the spiritual ideal, reaching God, realizing God, having the vision of the divine, if that is the topmost priority of my life, and if I'm still able to strive towards that, that is reason enough to be contented in spite of everything else not being particularly wonderful for us. So we could say this, that what are the kind of things that make me happy and what are the kind of things that make me disturbed is one way of seeing what are the priorities in my life. If I'm able to meditate well, and yet I have some health issues, what is it that is a higher priority for me? Do I feel joy that I'm able to meditate well? Is that joy lesser or greater than the pain and the suffering, the disturbance, the sorrow I feel at some health issues or some family issues? And so we always have to look at these things. There is never anyone in life who will say, everything is just going great for me. Nor is there anyone in life who can say, everything is going terrible for me. Our bag of life, so to speak, is a mixed bag. So there will be things to rejoice about and there will be things to grieve over. Now, depending on my priorities in life, either the grief will be overpowering or the joy will be overpowering. For a spiritual seeker, if attaining God is at the top of my list, as long as I'm able to struggle towards it, I think that is reason enough to remain cheerful, even as we go about taking care of other things in life which need our attention. So yes, there will be things to worry over, but if I can remain cheerful, recognizing my topmost priority is still intact, then I will be able to take care of these other things in my life as well. So that is, all of those ideas are included in this one word, santushta, being contented. And satatam santushta. Well, there are times in life when we are all contented, and there are a lot of other times in life when we are not contented. And that is why the adjective satatam, always being cheerful. Occasionally being cheerful, we all are. But a spiritual practice is to maintain that state of contentment all through. Yogi, of course, as a noun, we understand what yogi means, one who practices yoga. But here, it specifically means one who is steady in meditation. A yogi, you know that the word yuj, from the root yuj in Sanskrit, yoga means concentration. And that's what we do. When the focus of our concentration is a divine entity, is God or any symbol connected with our spiritual life, then yoga in that sense means meditation. So concentration on a spiritual ideal is same as meditation. So a yogi is one who is always focused on a spiritual ideal. So another important quality for a spiritual seeker is to be a yogi. There are passages in the Gita where Krishna tells Arjuna, Tasmat yogi bhava Arjuna. O Arjuna, become a yogi. Now there are many ways we could understand that instruction of Krishna, be a yogi. One simple and direct way to translate that would be focused on your ideal. And for a spiritual ideal, for a spiritual seeker, that ideal is spiritual, that ideal is God. So to be a yogi here means be focused on God. And that is what a bhakta is. Now we might say that is what we try to do at the time of meditation. But the word satatam that comes before means remaining focused on that ideal always, not just at some set times in the morning and evening. Now that may not be easy, clearly. Well, it's not easy to remain focused on the ideal even when we are meditating. What to speak of remaining focused on that ideal when we are doing other things? So the idea is simply this, that whatever is important to us in life, we see that we never forget it. It's like, think about someone very close to you, someone very dear to you, and you haven't met that person for a long time. And then that person, you receive an email or a message from that person saying, I'm going to come, I'll be arriving soon. You don't know exactly when, but you, and then because you love that person, because you haven't met that person for a long time, you will be waiting for the arrival of that person. Now, you're not just like sitting in a corner waiting. In the meantime, you have a bunch of things to attend to. You have your duties, you have responsibilities. So you are going about your daily chores, but you never ever forget then, somewhere in the corner of your heart, you always know, yes, my beloved is coming, or someone I love, my dear friend is coming. So just as that remains somewhere in the corner, irrespective of whatever activity I may be engaged in, and there will be times in a day when I'm just resting, all my chores are done, and I'll be thinking about my friend who is coming even more intensely. But even at other times, I will continue to think of my friend. That is what a bhakta does. That is what a devotee does. So if I think of myself as a devotee of God, if I have not yet had a vision of God, if I have, there are lots of ifs here, if I have the faith, that deep shraddha, that I will see God, then it is only a question of time, because I know I haven't seen God yet. I have this strong faith that I will see God, but I don't know when. So the situation is exactly identical to what I had described before. So here is this, the dearest friend of my life, the dearest, my father, my mother, my everything is going to come. I don't know when. I hope it's very soon. And therefore, when I'm meditating, when I'm praying, I'm intensely thinking of that arrival of the divine. And I'm readying, just like when we have a VIP guest coming, we tidy our room, we clean the house so that the guest, the divine guest will be taken good care of. So similarly, as we await the arrival of God, we need to clear up everything. And right now, our heart may be filled with lot of concerns, a lot of desires, a lot of wants, and lots of ambitions, and lots of plans. And if it may be so filled with other things that there may not be enough place for God when God arrives there. And so we must at least try to tidy up everything, put everything in their right place in our heart. So there will be a good, clean, welcoming, warm place when God arrives. So when we are praying and meditating, we'll be thinking of God even more intensely. But even after our prayer time and meditation time, when we are busy doing other things in life, we will never ever forget God is going to come. So that's what is meant by saying satatam, ever remaining immersed. That is what is meant by saying spiritualizing our entire life. In the beginning, our meditation time and our work time will remain separate. In fact, right now, whatever time is available to us is already compartmentalized into different sections. So there is my time for my spiritual practice. There is such thing as my family time. There is my work time. There is my hobby time. There's a time for my friends. So we have all these sections. And at some point, we will see that whichever of these entities that demand our time and energy, whichever of these become more and more prominent in our lives, they will spill over into other sections. So if, let's say, games are very important to me, if I love baseball or basketball, then whenever the season is going on, no matter what I'm doing, no matter whether it's my work time or my family time or whatever time, I will every now and then be checking what the score is if the game is on. So that game time will spill over into my other times. So similarly, for a spiritual seeker, God time. So right now, we can think about it this way. Right now, our God time is the time we spend, many of us, in the morning, a few minutes, evening, a few minutes. That's my spiritual practice time, which is good. Now, the question is, how and when will this spiritual time spill over into other sections of my day? For a spiritual seeker, it's a welcome change. If somehow, a little bit, it may not be as intense as it is during prayer and meditation, but somewhere throughout the day, this remaining connected with God, which somehow will remain in my life. And that is what is meant by satatam yogi, remaining always connected. Spiritualizing our entire day, spiritualizing all of the duties and responsibilities that we have, so that directly or indirectly, we are connected with God all the time. If there's anything in our lives which we feel there is no way I can connect it with God directly or indirectly, it's impossible to make any connection with God with this particular activity or aspect of my life, then a spiritual seeker says, then it shouldn't even be there. So that's the way I can fill my entire life with God. There will be times, as I said, where it will be more intense. There will be time when it will be less intense. But there should never, ever be a time when God is completely absent. Now, most of us may be very far from that ideal. But that's the ideal we have to strive for. That connection with the divine is never lost throughout the 24 hours in a day. Let's at least strive to do it during our waking hours. Right now, we don't have much control over what happens after we go to sleep. We don't control our dreams. We can just hope that we will have a very pleasant dream. But if there is a nightmare, we can't really control it. But in yoga, it is said, in an advanced stage of yogic practice, yogis are able to control their dreams. They are able to decide what kind of dream they want to have, if at all they want to have dreams. Right now, let us at least try to get our waking life under control. And when that is brought under control, we may be able to extend that awareness, that control, even in our dream and deep sleep states. Yatatma. Yatatma means, there you go, self-control. The root comes from the control in Sanskrit. So yatatma means control. And we know, all of us know, that even in purely secular life, there will be occasions when we need to control our immediate instincts. We know that in a workplace, even if someone is irritating us a lot and we may just want to hit back, we realize that that's not always the best policy. And so we control ourselves. Now, we need to have a similar control in every situation. Now, what should I control and why should I control it? And for a spiritual seeker, for a devotee, it's very simple. That there's anything in my life which is going to take me away from God or is going to make me forget God, then I must control myself from moving in that direction. So that's basically it. Anything that makes me forget that ideal, I should control myself from indulging in that activity or that kind of thinking. Doing always, going back to the Karma Yoga principle, doing always what is right, doing always what is good. Thinking always that is good, thinking always that is right. And what is good and what is right is anything that takes me closer to my spiritual ideal. Anything that takes me away from it, from a spiritual standpoint, would be wrong, would be bad for me. That is yatatma, dridha nishchayaha, possessed of firm conviction, nishchaya, firm determination. All of these things, as you can see, are very related. Because only when I have a firm conviction, a firm determination, a strong willpower, only then will I know that this is what I need to control. This is where I need to stop. This is where I need to direct my mind. But without that firm conviction, that firm determination, I won't be able to do it. And that can come only from strength. Now, there are two kinds of strength, at least. One is the physical strength, the kind of strength you get by doing workouts, going to gym, and that's important. All of us are not planning to be wrestlers, I think, I hope. But we do need a fairly healthy state of mind and a healthy state of the body, which is helpful. But more than physical strength, what we need is a mental strength, emotional strength, intellectual strength. Swami Vivekananda once said, what we want are muscles of iron and nerves of steel. Now, muscles of iron, that's the phrase he used, that you can get by doing some weightlifting and exercises. But nerves of steel, that can come only from a pure life, only from living truthfully, honestly, living according to dharma, not hurting anyone, non-violence. Non-violence includes a bunch of things, which will also be discussed here. not hurting anyone, not only physically, but not even through our words. So hurtful speech is violence. Hurtful thoughts are violence. I may not go and kill anyone, but even if in my mind I wish this person were dead, that's violence. That's violence through my mind. Or if I say something, I wish you were dead, that's violence through my speech. So you can see how profound and deep is this practice of non-violence. It's not just say, well, I don't own any gun, I don't beat anyone, so I'm non-violent. Yes, that's true, partly. But I could still be harboring all these violent tendencies in my mind. I could still be hurting others. I could still be jealous. Even jealousy is a form of violence. So when a person becomes established in non-violence, not only physical non-violence, but non-violence at all these subtler levels, that person becomes a powerhouse of strength. There is a sutra in the yoga books, the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. There is an aphorism which says, Ahimsayam pratisthayam vairatyagaha, which means when a person becomes established in non-violence, vaira means enmity, tyagaha, no one will be able to harbor thoughts of enmity in their presence. The books say that even a lion or a tiger will come in the presence of the yogi and not even want to eat that yogi. Will just sit meekly like a good dog. We know from the lives of some saints. Saint Francis of Assisi, for instance. We read about how birds and animals, they would just come and sit freely. The birds will come and sit on his shoulders. And why don't these birds come and sit on our shoulders when you go out for a walk in the park? There will be birds, there are squirrels, there are lots of creatures around. And no sooner you go near them, they just go far away. The birds fly away. Why? You may not be carrying a gun. You have no intention of killing that bird. And they go. The reason is, at least that's how one can understand it, that even though I may not have this very visible, tangible desire to go and kill them, but deep down, in a subtle form, those seeds of violence are still there in my heart. And maybe these birds and creatures are able to sense it instinctively. But even when those seeds of violence from my heart are completely removed, completely eliminated, then they won't feel threatened at all. And then they will just come freely. Yeah, you can see, to some extent, you can see that in just the different vibes that we get from people. There are some people whom there may be a person, you go to some place and there may be people, you may not even know them. But somehow there's something about some people, you just want to be in their presence. You want to go and speak with them or just hear what they are saying. And there may be some other people, again, you may not know anything about them, but you just want to run away from them or not go anywhere close to them. So how do we explain these things? I'm sure there are many, many different kinds of explanations for that. But at least one possible explanation is that there is some kind of, now I don't want to sound too new agey. I just hate this talk about vibrations and energy and all that. That's not what I'm meaning. But how do we explain that when we go and when we are in the company of people, there are some people we would love to be in their company. Some people we would love to hear what they say or speak with them, but there are some people we want to avoid. Now, if we know those people, then we can have some other explanations. But sometimes we may not know those people at all. Maybe just the first time we are ever seeing them, and yet sometimes the mind already has these ideas. So as I said, there could be many explanations for this, but also possible that there is some seeds in our heart, both positive and negative. And maybe many times we ourselves may be ignorant about what's there in a subtle form in our own heart. And maybe in some way we are intuiting the presence of these seeds in others. That's one explanation among the many, many that are possible. So, Dhrida Nishchayaha, therefore we need this strong determination, this strength of the mind. Swami Vivekananda once said that strength is life, weakness is death. So one way of determining whether I should do something or shouldn't do something is to ask myself, will it make me strong? If it is going to make me strong in at least one of these different ways, strong physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, intellectually, in some ways it is going to make me strong, then very likely it is something good for me. But again, if it is something that's going to weaken me in one or more or any of these different ways, then it's not good for me. So that could be one test of determining what we say, what is good or what is right, in terms of whether it will make me strong or it will make me weak. Next, Mai arpita manobuddhihi. Mai arpita manobuddhihi. Manaha is mind, buddhi is intellect. So my whole being is offered to God. And that's a way of saying that everything, such a person has both mind, intellect, the entire being dedicated to the spiritual ideal. Again, going back to what I said before, we have these competing goals and things in our life. And in the beginning, spiritual ideal is one of the many ideals that we have, or one of the many things that demand our time and attention. One way of describing that our spiritual life is becoming more intense or is becoming more important for us is to know that in that list of priorities that we have, the spiritual ideal begins to climb higher and higher and higher. And so essentially, it's just competing priorities in our life. So when God becomes the topmost priority in my life, then I can say that nothing in life is more important to me than the spiritual ideal. And that is what is meant by saying, Mai arpita manobuddhihi. That mind and intellect both are fixed on the divine being. They are not being frittered away on everything else. Again, this does not mean that I cannot be doing my other duties and responsibilities. As I said before, even when I'm carrying out my duties and responsibilities in my life, at my workplace, with the family, friends, and so on, it is connected in some way, directly or indirectly, with the spiritual ideal. So God is never left out of the equation. Now, if I have all of these qualities, then Krishna says, such a devotee is dear to me. Such a devotee has a better chance of making progress in spiritual life. Verse 15. Yasmanno dvijate loko, lokanno dvijate chayah, harshamarsha bhayot vegair, Mukto yassacha me priyaha. He by whom the world is not agitated and who cannot be agitated by the world, who is freed from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety, he is dear to me. Yasman na udvijate lokaha. Udvijate means being agitated or disturbed or afflicted. So a person who is not the cause of creating agitation or affliction in others, and nothing that is happening outside agitates this person. Such a person is dear to Krishna. So two things. First of all, there are a lot of things around in the world which can disturb me, which can make me mad. And if I refuse to get disturbed, if I refuse to get mad, and I don't do anything or say anything which will create disturbance in others, which will make others mad, such a person is dear to me. And think about it this way. Only in such a state of mind will it be possible for me to pray and meditate with full attention. Because if I have disturbed someone, then that someone is going to react and hit back, which is going to disturb me. It's a mutually feeding mechanism. I make others mad, and in return, they make me mad. I trouble others, and in return, I get troubles back. Now, in that scenario, how am I going to pray and meditate in peace, in harmony? All of these disturbances are going to create obstacles. All of these disturbances are not going to allow me to concentrate well in my prayer and meditation. So if I want to be completely focused during my spiritual practice, if I really want to have good meditation, then it's pretty obvious in some ways that I should not be disturbed by what's happening outside, and I should not do anything which will disturb people around me, so that they leave me in peace. I leave them in peace. And because I leave them in peace, I don't become a hurdle, an obstacle in their meditation. If, let's say, there's another devotee, another spiritual seeker, maybe a member of your own family or among your friends, and you have hurt that person by saying something nasty, or you have been mean to that person. And because of that meanness that you have exhibited toward that person, when that person sits for meditation, and that person has not been able to transcend that hurt that you have sent in their direction, their meditation is disturbed. So you have become an obstacle in that person's spiritual life, just as that person in return can become an obstacle in your spiritual life, with the result that there are these two disgruntled people in the world. Neither of them is happy. On the other hand, if I am strong enough to not get affected by the disturbances around, if I'm mature enough to not create disturbance in anyone's life, then I can remain in peace. I can leave them in peace as well. And then maybe if both of these people involved are devotees, are spiritual seekers, they both can pray well, they both can meditate well. So, by being calm, peaceful, harmonious, I'm not only doing a service to others, but I'm also benefiting myself. So it serves two purposes. Because if I leave others in peace, they will leave me in peace. We always get back whatever we give to the world. Sometimes people complain, there's so much hatred around. Everyone hates me. No one likes me. And of course, we can get disturbed. Obviously, anyone would get disturbed by that. But it's possible to look at this phenomenon and say that whatever I give out into the world comes back to me reflected. If at present I am receiving such hatred from others, it's possible that I may have thrown out some hatred outside into the world. And therefore, the simple thing that I can do is now consciously try to spread love and understanding and compassion everywhere. Because everything is circular. If I throw love out, that love will come back to me. If I send out thoughts of friendship and understanding, they will come back to me. Whatever I give out comes back to me. Swami Vivekananda's one poem is there, no one but me to blame. Because this blaming game never ends, and that's what most people do. And I mean, it's easy to say it's because of this person, it's because of that country, because of this, because of that. And people do deal with that all the time. But a really strong person would say, wait a minute, let me try a different way of understanding this phenomenon. Let me try to do it differently. Rather than blaming anyone, let me take the responsibility upon myself and say, I believe that whatever I send out comes back to me. Let me now consciously try to send out thoughts of love and understanding. And be patient. And we will see. You may not have to wait too long. You will see that love and understanding will come back to you. If you want people to love you, you must love other people. If you want people to understand you, you must try to understand other people. It's always mutual. It can't be that I just hate everyone, but everyone should love me. It never works that way. It's always mutual. And that is what is meant by saying, Yasman no dvijate loko, lokan no dvijate chayaha. Next, one who is free from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety. Harsha is joy. Amarsha means envy. Amarsha also means jealousy. Bhaya, fear. Udvega, anxiety. All of these things are signs that there's something lacking within me. Now, why should I be free from joy? I should be free from joy because joy and sorrow are the obverse and reverse of the same coin. So, saying that I should be free from joy is same as saying I should be free from sorrow, because they always come together. We can all look at our own lives. Yes, there have been great occasions when we are very happy, but that happiness has always come sooner or later, followed by some pain or suffering in our life. Our entire life can be seen is just going from back and forth between sukha and dukkha, joy and fear, just like the tennis ball being hit on one court and being returned from the other court. And our whole life can go this way. There are times when things make us happy, we rejoice, and we just think that that's how it's always going to be. It never is that way. After some time, that joy subsides. Maybe there is a peaceful time, or there is a time when nothing much seems to happen, and then suddenly, in some form or in some way, through some agency, whether it's nature or people or the government or the virus, suddenly there is a lot of pain and suffering. And then something wonderful happens. The vaccines come and there is joy again. I mean, this is just one example, but we just go back and forth. And then what is life? If you just kind of go with just being running between joy and sorrow, in the process then getting old and then one day dying, and then being reborn again and go from joy and sorrow, get old, die, being born again, this can go on endlessly. And that is why we have to be free from this duality of joy and sorrow. We need to transcend this. Amarsha, and all these, as I mentioned before about ahimsa, now all this, amarsha, meaning envy or jealousy, that is a form of violence. Swami Vivekananda in one place says that he wanted to stress how terrible is this weakness called jealousy. He one place says, even God cannot help us if jealousy takes hold in our heart. Now, obviously, we could say, well, God can do anything. That's true. But what he wanted to emphasize was how terrible this thing called jealousy is. So that is one thing every devotee has to make sure. Envy and jealousy are negativities which kind of poison our heart. We are not able to see anything clearly if a heart is filled with that. And fear and anxiety. Fear, the basis of fear is duality. As long as there is even one other being besides me, that seed of fear will always remain. And that is why Advaita, just non-duality, when there is no other, that time one is fearless. And the example often given is that of just deep sleep. Because there are things and people we fear in the waking state. Sometimes dreams can be nightmare. There are people and things that we can be afraid of in the dream world. But in the state of deep sleep, when there is no one else, we are fearless. So in deep sleep state, when there is no one else, we are fearless. So that attaining to that state of fearlessness is the goal of life. And Swami Vivekananda said that in Vedanta, that highest state of attainment is equated with fearlessness. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we read, Abhayam vai Janaka praptosi. When King Janaka went to sage Yajnavalkya to learn from him and do spiritual practices under his guidance, and when he finally attained enlightenment, Yajnavalkya tells him, O Janaka, you have now reached the state of fearlessness. So fear, joy and sorrow, envy, jealousy, anxiety, one who is freed from all of these is a person fit for spiritual life. So that's another thing that we should strive to look in our hearts and try to see whether we can transcend these weaknesses. We should not be disheartened if we find that these are there in some form in our heart. The mind that we have is a mind that has been with us in millions and trillions of our past births. There's lots of seeds, lots of impressions we have accumulated there. So sometimes it can be rather disheartening to see the weaknesses in our own heart. But that's where we have to be strong. That's where we must have this firm determination, say, no matter how depressing it looks in my own heart, through God's grace, through my own willpower, I will eliminate all these weaknesses one by one. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. Let's take a look at the questions. How is inner strength connected with firm conviction? It seems that faith would play a large role in conviction. Faith does help, but conviction is also often connected with intellect, intellectual conviction that we speak about. So sometimes that deep conviction can come without the intellect being a part of it, which is where faith does play a role. Sometimes it could be a conviction that can come through deep thinking. I mean, that's why we call it the intellectual conviction. Now, both to sustain intellectual conviction or even to sustain faith, inner strength always helps, because sometimes we see that faith is not strong. There is faith. It's not that the faith is absent, but the faith is wavering. Even people who sometimes they have faith in God and something terrible happens and their faith is shaken. Now that shaking of faith or that wavering of faith occurs because that inner strength is lacking. So inner strength is very helpful, very needed to even stabilize and strengthen the faith as well as conviction. So inner strength, and that's why Swami Vivekananda stressed so much on the importance of strength. Strength at every level is very helpful, very much needed, not only in the struggle for life itself, but especially in spiritual life. Next, sometimes seriously following our spiritual ideals does cause irritation with those who don't understand. Isn't this causing agitation to the world that Krishna mentions in verse 15? Indeed. It's natural that sometimes the spiritual ideals that a devotee may have may not be understood by people around, just as the worldly ideals that other people have is sometimes not understood by a devotee. So when we speak about ideal, it's not just about spiritual ideal. There is a worldly ideal, there is a materialistic goal. And so sometimes, just as it is important or needed, what a spiritual seeker might expect or want other people, even if they don't follow the spiritual ideal, to at least try to understand their interest in spirituality. So similarly, spiritual seekers will have to understand why is it that worldly people are attracted towards materialistic goals. Neither of them are being asked to change their ideals, but understanding what makes people do whatever they do or think the way they think is very important for just living peacefully. So it's possible for people who do not share a common ideal to live with understanding, live peacefully, provided each understands why the other is seeking whatever they are seeking. And if we refuse to understand, then yes, indeed, as in verse 15, it does create disturbance for oneself and disturbance for others as well. What does it mean to be free from? Isn't feeling this emotion mentioned intrinsic to being human? So the reference is here to that phrase, being free from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety. If instead of surrendering these emotions to God and feeling these emotions fully, yes, true. So instead of, the idea is not to suppress them, because if I suppress these emotions, I'm not really being freed from them. It's a little bit like saying, there are certain things I want to get rid of, but instead of throwing them away, I just put them in my basement or in my garage. I haven't really become free from them. It's just that I'm not seeing them anymore. So suppression is a little bit like that. If I suppress these things, I'm not being free from them. In fact, suppressing is terrible, because at least if there are these things that I don't need or things that are not good for me, if they are within my sight, at some time, even if not now, I might be able to pick them up and throw them away. But if I put them in my basement or in the garage, I'm not seeing them. I may forget that they are there, but they are there and they can continue to cause harm. And so the opportunity to throw them away will go away if I don't even know that they are there. And so to be free from is not to just forget about those things or not to suppress them, but to find a way to eliminate them from our lives. And certainly, if I can offer them to God, well, I am being free from them. But very soon we realize that it's easy to say, I'm offering it to God. But things just don't go away by just my saying it. So what exactly am I doing when I say I'm offering these to God? When I offer it to God, if I mean it, then it really means they are no longer mine because I've already offered them to God. If they are no longer mine, I cannot then use them further in my life without God's permission. So after offering all these things to God, if I still continue to harbor these things in my heart, I'm really stealing them from God, what I have offered. Now I'm just kind of dwelling on this longer because this idea about offering things to God, that language gets used very often in spiritual books, but it just becomes like a good way to express it, but we have to also see it in practical terms. Because oftentimes we say, even in Karma Yoga, well, offer all the results to God of their actions. So what does offering the results of my actions means? Which means if I've done something good and I offer it to God, and someone then praises me for it, and if I enjoy that praise and relish that praise, that means I'm not really offered it to God because it's still with me. Because otherwise, that praise shouldn't even come to me because I've already offered it to God. So we have to kind of understand what does offering to God mean. Because a real offering means it is no longer mine, no longer with me. If it's no longer with me, then I'm free from them. So now that just to one other thought. That doesn't mean we should not then say, well, if I'm not able to offer it, then why even say it? I think there is an utility in even making that commitment, even that saying that often, so that a time may come that even when we say I offer it to God, even if I'm not fully able to offer it in a literal sense to God, but that repeated reminder of that practice may one day make it possible for me to offer it really and perfectly to the Divine Being. Next, if we repeatedly feel uncomfortable in the presence of some people, even without spending enough time with them, nurturing friendship with them may be difficult. Is it right to stay away from such company? Absolutely. For a spiritual seeker, unless your work or some other considerations make it absolutely necessary that you have to spend time in the company of some people, then of course you have to find other ways to deal with it. But if it is not absolutely necessary, one should of course stay away from such people. Socializing just for the sake of socializing is not any part of any spiritual practice. So if it's not necessary, don't do it. Not just about company, with regarding anything in life. Next. When we are in the presence of strangers, the feelings they may induce are due to our own impressions. Isn't it true? I don't think they have anything to do with this. I don't know. As I said, there could be many different explanations. Certainly, one's own samskaras definitely play a role there, but an intuitive impression also plays a role there, I think. Samskaras, yes, of course. That's why you see, even in movies, the villainous characters, oftentimes they just play to stereotypes. There'll be a certain way they'll act, a certain way they will look, a certain way they'll be dressed, and you know, oh, this person is not a good person. And then that kind of impression then stays with us. And when we see someone, even if a total stranger, who dresses and moves and talks in a stereotype in our head which looks like a bad person, we are likely to conclude that that person is a bad person. So yes, samskaras do play a role, but sometimes what people say, just an intuition that, I knew there was, and sometimes people say, sometimes just people say it, but sometimes it's genuine, that they just feel like, no, there's something very funny here going on. And then later on, and they may have no proof for that kind of feeling, and that later on their intuition is proved to be true with whatever that happens. So I think both play a role there. In verse 15, getting and giving no trouble to the world could imply being indifferent to the world is a desirable state. That doesn't feel right. Can you expand on this, please? I don't think we have to be indifferent to the world. It is possible to interact with the world without receiving or giving trouble. So I don't think just getting in contact with the world itself is a troublesome activity. Maybe in the highest state, yes. Instead of engaging with God, if I'm engaging with others, and if I don't do it with the proper attitude, then of course there's going to be trouble. But I think it is possible to deal with the world and have the world deal with us, and yet able to protect ourselves. Even in these COVID times, when in the beginning everyone was like, just stay at home, don't go out, don't have any interaction with others. But we have found a way, now of course with vaccines, but even before that, if I am well masked, if I keep social distancing, I am going out into the world and yet not troubling them and not allowing them to trouble me. I'm taking care to see that I'm not spreading any viruses to them, but also protecting myself from those viruses. Now here we are just talking about COVID, but there are these subtle viruses, if you like. The virus of anger, hatred, jealousy. Now if I express those thoughts in words or through my actions or through my thinking, I am spreading those viruses into the world. And other people are spreading it too. Now, I should prevent myself from spreading those thoughts and ideas through my thoughts, actions, and words. And I need to find a way to protect myself. So no matter how much hatred someone may have in their heart, I need to find a way to protect myself. And so it's not indifference, but it's just a way of protecting oneself and protecting other people around us. And it is possible to do so. Next, how do the ideas in these verses be conveyed to other people to reduce the cycle of violence, like what is going on in the world today in different conflicts? I think we need to speak to everyone in a language they can understand. So it is possible that some people, if you just share these verses with them, they might understand and act upon it. But there may be many other people saying, it makes no sense to me, or I don't care for it. And then maybe you have to speak to them in a different language. Sometimes religious language may put off people who don't care for religion, who don't believe in God. So quoting the Gita to them, of course, is not going to help. One might have to then express this idea in more utilitarian terms about how it might help social life, or how it might help international relations if you want to bring politics into it, and so on. So again, I think a best way to deal with this is to just speak the language that people understand. And therefore, one method may not work for all. Next, Swamiji says that we cannot see God, we can only be God. With respect to having a vision of God or seeing God, we are actually becoming God. Now, seeing a vision of God is not exactly like being God oneself, because seeing is still an objective activity. But in order to see even a vision of God objectively, we need to purify ourselves enough to be fit to receive that vision, to see that vision. We know that in the 11th chapter of the Gita, which we saw a few weeks ago, only Arjuna could see that vision. Arjuna was ready for that vision. And that's why Krishna said, I'm going to give you the divine eyes. So even to see this vision, there has to be a certain amount of evolution. Without that, we cannot see it. But with that, when that evolution is carried further and further, then that seeing outside gets transformed into seeing within. So a vision is a stepping stone to ultimately being oneself. So the two are not exactly identical. Here's a comment. I think we want our way and God's way both at the same time. And that is where at least my problem comes in. So I suppose my work has to be on making God's way my way. Yes, that's true. In fact, there is this prayer in that tiny little book called The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis, in which one of the prayers there says that, God, please make my plan as close to your plan as possible. There is an acknowledgement that everything is going to happen as God plans it. God's plan alone is going to work out. God's will alone will work out. And yet, you and I, every one of us, we have our own little ideas, our own little plans. And so we make our plans. Sometimes they work out exactly the way we planned it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they work out only partially the way we had imagined it. And so what a devotee sees is that ultimately, whatever God wills it, only that will happen. So the prayer is, Lord, I have my own little will, my own little plan, but make my will as close to the divine will as possible. Only then will there be a less heartbreak, if you like. Next and last question. An introvert person usually gets criticized for not being very expressive or not having many friends or popular social circle. Should such a person need to change something? I think criticism occurs in both directions. There are people who are introverts who look down upon people who are extroverts, who don't like people who just go about socializing. And then, of course, there are extroverts who criticize those who are introverts. I don't think there is intrinsically any need for the either to change themselves. It just depends on what their priorities in life are. And oftentimes, I would imagine that these tendencies are just inherent in our personal makeup, I think. I don't think any of us can just sit and choose, should I be introvert or should I be extrovert? I don't think it's that simple. I think just by all the different factors of my inner life, my natural tendency might be to be an introvert or to be an extrovert. It's just something that comes naturally to a person. So now forcing an introvert to be an extrovert or an extrovert to be an introvert may not necessarily be the best idea. I don't think that one or the other is greater than the other. I think there are just two different ways people live in life, or people react, or people relate to their situation in life. And that's fine. It's possible to be an extrovert and yet be a good devotee. It's possible to be an introvert and yet be a terribly worldly person. So it's not to think that just because I'm an introvert, I'm necessarily very spiritual, or just because someone is an extrovert, they are necessarily worldly. I think they are completely unrelated. These personality traits and one's priorities in life. I don't think we can make an easy equation among them. So thank you for your questions and comments, and we will continue discussing this when we meet next Sunday. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.